Macron promotes multilateral solutions for global problems at the Paris Peace Forum. Forgotten disease, pneumonia now the world's top killer of children. And an Asmara resident gives a special tour of historic capital. This is CGTN. Welcome to Africa Live. From Nairobi, I'm Beatrice Marshall. Also coming up on the program, Penina Karibe is here with the day's business headlines. Penina.
Thank you, Beatrice. And coming up on Africa Live Business, regional expansion pays off as Equity Group rakes in $170 million in profits. And Sudan's new government seeks $5 billion funding to avert an economic collapse. I'll have details of those stories and plenty more in just a bit. For now, it's back to you, Beatrice.
Penina, thank you. And we begin in France, where 27 heads of state and government have gathered for the second edition of the Paris Peace Forum. The meeting was set up by French President Emmanuel Macron to find multilateral solutions to ensuring peace and stability around the world. CGTN's correspondent Natalie Powell reports.
Governments, business leaders and NGOs are in Paris, calling for collective action for world peace. High-profile participants like China's Vice President and the President of the DRC want to see closer global cooperation on dealing with destabilizing issues.
To preserve peace, we need to engage in debate and share with one another the solutions generated and experienced by each of us. By doing so, it then is possible to have a common agenda, integrating a number of common values and make sure man and the planet are at the forefront of our efforts.
80 debating sessions are taking place and 114 global governance projects will be pitched over the course of the forum, covering topics such as inequality, climate change and preventing extremism. While companies involved in initiatives like e-waste recycling hope to promote business and form partnerships.
That is obviously a great window for communication, because here we have access to very high-level people to talk to, and then we can get the political interest that this topic deserves. Second thing is that this project has global aims. Basically, we're trying to set up an activity which could be replicable in about 100+ countries. So right now we're looking for interested representatives to be able to work together and try to, set up the context to be able to implement the first replications of the project in the next few years.
And with COP15, the Convention on Biological Diversity taking place in China next year, the growing cooperation between Paris and Beijing on tackling climate change and developing biodiversity is also being discussed here.
China and France are trying very hard to raise the multilateralism and both to cooperate in the environmental field and the other field, of course, together, and trying to make COP15 the next COP for Biodiversity Convention on the highest agenda possible.
Now in its second year, the Paris Peace Forum aims to overcome risks faced across the globe. President Emmanuel Macron has spoken many times of how peace cannot be taken for granted. But with the constantly evolving landscape of technology, trade, climate change and economy, to name just a few, there are major concerns that these issues could well spark conflict. But the French president hopes that establishing a common responsibility to finding solutions here in Paris will go some of the way to tackling these major global issues. Natalie Powell, CGTN, Paris.
Now, for the first time since 2009, Zimbabwe is issuing its own dollar notes. New 2 and 5 Zimbabwean dollar notes have begun circulating. The introduction of the notes is part of an effort to ease a liquidity crunch which has affected the economy for over 3 years.
They look exactly the same. The only difference, removal of the word bond note, confirmation that Zimbabwe has its own fully fledged currency. The notes began circulating Tuesday, but some are yet to lay their hands on them.
Only a few people withdrew cash, then the ATM machine broke down. We have been waiting for 2 hours now.
Withdrawals are limited to a contentious $300 per week.
With prices going up, that won't buy much. They should allow us to withdraw as much as we need so that we don't keep coming back.
The central bank has tried to allay fears that the new notes will fuel inflation by explaining that they'll be swapped for existing electronic bank balances. Furthermore, it says they will be drip-fed into the market. There are worries that once withdrawn, the money may not return to the banks.
There are other people who are living on trading in currencies. They trade with the bond notes, the Zim dollar, the rand, the US dollar, because they don't have jobs. So as long as we have a lot of people on the streets that are making money out of these currencies and the currency shortages, then we're not going anywhere.
The new currency was introduced by Finance Minister Professor Mthuli Ncube to stabilize the economy. On Thursday, he hopes to present a growth-triggering 2020 budget. But because of missed targets from the previous one, not everyone shares his optimism.
He set some targets which were very clear. That by the end of this year, 2019 December, inflation should be 5%, annual inflation. Economic growth measured by increase in GDP, 3.1% positive. So what has happened? Inflation is above 500% now, more than 100 times the target of the minister. Economic growth is now expected by government to be 6.9% negative.
Foreign currency shortages, a severe drought and cyclone devastation have combined to plunge Zimbabwe into its worst economic crisis since 2008. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Once a forgotten disease, the latest UNICEF report now says pneumonia is the world's top killer of children, accounting for 800,000 deaths this year alone. This means that statistically, one child dies every 39 seconds from pneumonia. Here's Laura Walubengo with more details.
The latest report by UNICEF detailing pneumonia prevalence rates in the year 2018 is not only astounding, but also eye-opening. It says 800,000 children died in the year, and pneumonia is to blame for the deaths. Nigeria tops the list with the highest cases, with India, Pakistan, Democratic Republic of Congo and Ethiopia following in that order. For years, malaria was said to be the top killer of children in the world. This might have led the world to focus more on eradicating the disease, thus rendering pneumonia as one of the forgotten but deadliest diseases. Most of the deaths hit children within their first month of life. This means that up to 2,200 children die daily due to pneumonia. Other diseases that are decimating children include diarrhea and malaria, respectively. Despite the grim figures, pneumonia is preventable through proper vaccination. Low-cost antibiotics can also be used to treat the disease when and if diagnosed early. But those with severe cases of pneumonia require oxygen treatment, which is not easily available in most poor countries, especially in Africa. However, many children in affected countries go unvaccinated, yet others are living with weakened immune systems due to HIV/AIDS and malnutrition. UNICEF and other children's agencies are calling for more efforts to curb this disease. Pneumonia is a lung disease that is caused by bacteria, virus or fungi. Patients often gasp for breath as their lungs fill with fluids such as pus. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
The European Commission has granted approval to U.S. pharmaceutical company Merck to market its trial Ebola vaccine. The vaccine has been widely used in the ongoing Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo and is believed to be effective in preventing the spread of the deadly disease. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa, who has covered this topic extensively for us, now brings us this report from Kinshasa.
The Ebola vaccine, Iverbo, was being used under emergency guidelines to protect people against Ebola in the DRC. But the European Commission has now granted its manufacturers conditional approval to market it. The condition is that the vaccine be administered to people who are 18 years and older. U.S. drug maker Merck says the approval will allow it to manufacture licensed doses which will start becoming available in 2020. The World Health Organization says the vaccine has been more than 97% effective in the DRC outbreak. Ebola has killed more than 2,100 people in the DRC since the outbreak started in August last year. It's been concentrated in the provinces of North Kivu and Ituri, which also face insecurity. The DRC's Ministry of Health is set to introduce another experimental vaccine manufactured by U.S. firm Johnson & Johnson on the 14th of November. The vaccine will be administered outside the areas currently affected by Ebola. 11,000 doses of the vaccine are already in the eastern city of Goma. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa will lead a delegation to the 11th BRICS Summit in Brazil. BRICS has become an important geopolitical and development tool for the 5 nations. Here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola with a look at how South Africa has benefited from the trade bloc.
South Africa is the smallest of the BRICS nations and was last to join the group back in 2010. It fast became a voice for the continent, but has also benefited significantly from growing economic trade ties. Its intra-BRICS trade now stands at around $35 billion.
There is not a single country where we have not seen a serious increase in trade volumes over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, as well as investment flows. If you look at China, India, particularly those 2 countries, the trade levels, tourism levels, we've definitely seen that either directly or indirectly, us being a member of the BRICS has definitely given us a tremendous exposure to business communities, to potential tourists, etc., in those markets.
The new development bank has so far been the most crucial institution. It provides cheaper financing than elsewhere in the market. Around $1.8 billion in loans has been approved for infrastructure projects in South Africa over the past 3 years.
We see often when economies like South Africa is at the moment has low growth figures, what governments tend to do is to invest significantly into infrastructure to try and stimulate the market, to pump money into the market. Of course, that has the short-term benefits while projects are being constructed, creating jobs, creating extra financing into the economy.
The development of the BRICS working groups has also aided in skills and knowledge transfer and collaboration across many different sectors.
If we look at the broader picture, certainly issues such as capacity building, sharing of knowledge has also been a key component of BRICS cooperations. And specifically we see in the BRICS around the 4th Industrial Revolution, so around issues such as digitalization, such as the future of work, such as e-commerce.
There's a very interesting discussion on agriculture particularly, and I think there's a big future for agricultural contact between the BRICS nations, and there you're probably looking at tremendous benefit that will go to small and medium enterprises.
When the 5 nations meet, they'll be looking to further cement those economic ties. There'll be a focus on the fast-changing global digital economy, and South Africa, of course, are going to be pushing for the new development bank to actually widen its net to include other emerging markets. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, earlier we sat down with Jonathan Foster Pedley, the Dean and Director of the African branch of the Henley Business School, based in South Africa. He touched on how BRICS is creating an economic order outside of the Western model.
It's one of those things that's quite hard to quantify. I think the economy is benefiting in broad ways. We need to have a voice across the non-Western countries. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa all need to be able to have some common collaboration and to express their point of view, their voice in the world, and to find an alternative to the classic, typical Western model. So how it's benefited us, as I think, has allowed us to talk to a different point of view, start building multilateral trade collaboration, collaboration around security, healthcare, digital economies, bringing in a perspective from economies that have really built alternatives to the traditional model. BRICS constitutes well over about 30% of the world economy now, if not more, and that's growing. So as a result of that, we're starting to find collaboration between the different centers. Now, the collaboration between China and South Africa, for example, is enormously important, but China and Africa generally is very important. We need to develop that voice. We also need a voice in the South American continent and bridges between South America, Russia, India, and China. So we're benefiting, I think, in ways that are hard to put your finger on, but in the times to come, as the economies of India and China grow and they need a connection into Africa, we'll find that those the hard work we're putting in now, that the governments are putting in now, that President Ramaphosa is putting in now from South Africa, for example, on behalf of the African continent as a whole, will pay off significantly, and we mustn't undermine or underestimate the value of those collaborations. Well, I think he should prioritize the new development bank and the deals on building up capability to pay off when the company's in deficit. There is a fund for that, and I think he also needs to prioritize a positive view of South Africa. We live in Africa in particular, and perhaps in Brazil too, in a very bipolar world. Life goes up and life goes down. And if you look at any particular moment in time, it looks positive or negative. But the trends across Africa are extraordinarily positive, and I'm sure that'll happen irrespective of the particular presidents or the particular regimes in power in South America as well. And so you'll see an increasing in democracy and a better life expectancy, education growing, trade growing as well. And over time, you'll see the trend is positive. I think President Ramaphosa needs to tell that message.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Chinese President Xi Jinping visits Acropolis Museum and Pantheon in Greece. And an Asmara resident gives us a special tour of the historic capital.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Let's now turn to President Xi Jinping's visit to Greece. He visited the Acropolis Museum, which sits at the foot of the Acropolis in Athens. He also visited the Parthenon and viewed the statue of Athena together with his Greek counterpart, Prokopis Pavlopoulos. He also met with former Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras. This is the first state visit by a Chinese leader to the European nation in 11 years. A joint statement and a number of deals were signed on Monday. And following the Greek trip, President Xi is heading to Brazil to attend the 11th BRICS Summit. He will meet with leaders from Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa on Wednesday and Thursday in Brasilia. Hong Kong's leader has called on the city to come together to help end the months of violence and unrest that has unhinged a social order. It comes as anti-government protesters turned to vandalizing public services on Tuesday. CGTN's Xiao Yunfei has more.
Carrie Lam called the demonstrators selfish and said their violent actions were paralyzing the city. She praised the region's civil service as well as those who remained committed to nonviolence, adding that everyone can play their own part in restoring peace and social order.
When we call for people in all walks of life in the city to stop the violence, we mean that every citizen and every sector could contribute their share. Therefore, I would like to appeal to the community, including the students participating in the demonstrations. I urge university authorities and schools to advise their students not to participate in these illegal acts and to avoid scenes where violent demonstrations are taking place.
Despite Lam's emotional pleas, the protests continued in multiple third-level schools across the city on Tuesday. Riders threw missiles from a footbridge near the University of Hong Kong. One chair hit a motorbike driver. There were also chaos at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, with a standoff between protesters and police lasting well into the night. Masked demonstrators set up barricades on roads and threw bricks and petrol bombs. Police fired tear gas to disperse protesters. They also condemned the demonstrators' careless actions, saying they were putting lives in danger.
Riotous violence is not only reckless, but also random. Anyone could have been the next victim without any prior warning.
With more violent protests expected on Wednesday, at least 4 universities have decided to suspend classes. Whether Carrie Lam's appeal to society has any effect over the coming days remains to be seen. Zhao Yunfei, CGTN, Hong Kong.
Over 6,000 delegates from 160 countries assembled in Nairobi as the International Conference on Population and Development Summit took off. Leaders are taking stock of the progress made, as well as the areas where more effort is required. Here's CGTN's Wilkes Tanyabwa.
25 years after the first International Conference on Population and Development was held, a section of world leaders and stakeholders assembled yet again, this time in Nairobi, to take stock of the progress. The 3-day conference is dubbed ICPD 25. In 1994, in Cairo, Egypt, 179 governments made a declaration to work towards zero maternal deaths, zero cases of gender violence, and zero harmful practices against girls. This in recognition of the fact that the success of these goals is tied to the development goals of different countries.
Today, we stand united to declare the time to act is now. Never lose sight of who it is that we're fighting for. Anyone excluded, neglected, abused, forgotten.
We cannot return to a time when women had little say in reproductive issues, or for that matter, in any area of their lives. I think we can all agree that ICPD was a turning point, a defining moment in our history.
The conference, co-convened by Kenya and Denmark and hosted by the UNFPA, creating a platform to celebrate the gains made this far. But several hurdles still stand in the way of the rise of women and girls. 1 in 5 women continues to experience gender-based violence. 800 women and girls die every day during pregnancy and childbirth, and every year 4 million girls endure the painful effects of FGM.
We need to accelerate the promise of Cairo in order to build sustainable, vibrant, and inclusive societies. But if we fail to deliver on the Cairo promise, we risk consigning our children to a less secure future than we inherited.
The United Nations Population Fund estimates that it will cost $264 billion towards safeguarding women and girls and their rights. Already, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Somalia and Ethiopia have signed an agreement to address cross-border FGM. Delegates will also make a Nairobi declaration as the world works to keep the Cairo promise. Wilkes Tanyabwa, CGTN.
4 police officers filmed beating and kicking a university student in Kenya during a protest have been identified and suspended. The Kenya National Police Service says disciplinary action will be taken against them and any other officers found to have used excessive force once an investigation by the Internal Affairs Unit is complete. A video of the student being brutally assaulted went viral on social media. It showed police officers, some wearing body armor, beating and kicking the student as he lay defenseless on the ground. CGTN's Robert Nagila has the report.
The images that shocked a nation. 4 police officers brutally assaulting a university student who was part of a student protest on Monday in Nairobi, ironically against insecurity. He was then detained, locked up in a cell without access to medical attention. CGTN has now identified the student. His name is Alan Omondi, a fourth-year student at the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. The protesters had blocked a major highway over insecurity in the area, demanding the government takes action.
Early this year, a student called Tabitha was killed. This semester, in the last 1 week, 2 students were stabbed and were told it's motorcycle operators.
Our parents sent us here to study and to get our degrees, and not to be murdered in the streets.
To give birth to the society.
Initially, as images of the brutal beating became public, the police remained silent, but public anger continued to grow. By late Monday evening, following intervention from the Internal Security Minister, police took action. A tweet from the minister's handle read, "I've spoken to the Inspector General of Police and we both agree firm and decisive action shall be taken against any officer who used excessive force within the next 24 hours. The police service put out a statement shortly after, saying an investigation by Internal Affairs was underway. It ends, and I quote, "Any officer found culpable will be held accountable." Despite millions of dollars spent on police reforms, Kenya's police have long been accused of brutality and human rights violations, including extrajudicial killings. 3 years ago, after the general elections, a police officer was filmed mercilessly beating up a protester outside the Electoral Commission's offices. On Tuesday, the police issued another statement saying the officers involved had been identified and interdicted. Meanwhile, late Monday, police released Alan Omondi to his family, who took him to hospital. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
The Eritrean capital Asmara is a UNESCO-registered World Heritage City. CGTN's Girum Chala got a special tour there, courtesy of a long-time resident.
Hi, my name is Paulo Solomon. I'm a native of Eritrea. We are in the main avenue, the Haranet Avenue. We are in front of the cathedral that was built in the 1930s. Also, this avenue, in the old days, back in the 50s, it had more traffic lights than Rome. The Italians called it a little Rome, but I think we have, in a smaller area, I think we have more Art Deco and emphasis in the heritage buildings and structures. This is where the Eritreans take their stroll in the evenings, in the daytime, as you see, across the cathedral, or the businesses. Variety of businesses exist. This is the pride and joy of our city. This is Fiataliero. It's a landmark. It was built in the 1930s by a famous Italian architect. Anyway, it has been recognized as part of UNESCO as a heritage. And it looks like a plane. It's an Art Deco. This was built in order to serve a service station. But it looks, they have kept it as a landmark. They're not going to put anything else underneath in order to preserve it. This is Alexander Pushkin. His grandfather was taken from here, a few kilometers from Asmara, a place called Lagwain. He was taken to Turkey, to make it short, and then the Turkish Tsar gave it to a Russian Tsar in Pittsburgh. So this is the grandchild, Alexander Pushkin. Literally, he is the Shakespeare of Russia. With dignitaries from Russia and dignitaries from Eritrea, this statue was set in 2009. This is called Cinema Croce Rossa, which it means Red Cross Cinema. It was very affordable. This also was built in the 1930s. As kids, we started going to the movies here for 50 cents, Ethiopian cents. So anyone could afford to go, and they were giving shows from 12 noon to about 10 o'clock in the evening.
Well, let's now go to Penina Karibe for the latest business news. Penina.
Thank you, Beatrice. And coming up on Africa Live Business.
Regional expansion pays off as Equity Group rakes in $170 million in profits. And Sudan's new government seeks $5 billion funding to avert an economic collapse.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
We start off in Kenya, where lender Equity Group has raked in $170 million in profits in its third quarter. That is a 10% growth in the 3 months to September compared to $154 million recorded last year. The bank says the earnings were boosted by its subsidiaries in Uganda, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. Equity Group's total loan book also expanded in the period, standing at around $3 billion. The bank is the first listed lender to announce its third quarter results. The results come just days after the Kenyan Parliament lifted the interest rate cap. The repeal was done to end a 3-year credit squeeze to the private sector. Sudan needs up to $5 billion in budget support to avert an economic collapse. That's according to the country's finance ministry. At the moment, Sudan's new government is looking to build a youth-focused economy through fundamental reforms. However, CGTN's Daniel Arap Moina reports that plan seems far from the reality.
An economy deep in distress, Sudan is eyeing to start a new course. But at what cost? According to the country's finance ministry, the Horn of Africa nation needs up to $5 billion in budget support to avert a looming economic collapse.
The budget support, I think, for example, some estimates ranges between 3 to 4, maybe even 5 billion. Once we get the budget process going and we align the numbers and do the right the calculations, I think we should be able in a better position to do it.
Where more than half of Sudan's current 44 million people live in poverty. Late last year, months of demonstrations over cash shortages and price hikes triggered an uprising against then leader Omar al-Bashir. Fast forward after his ouster, Sudan is yet to recover. The state has in recent months been getting by on aid from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates.
I expected that once the people took to the streets and the youth took to the streets, that things would change. But the situation is worse. People are standing in line for bread, to eat lunch, and they cannot find any.
There is big pressure. Market prices are insanely high. We're working here and it's not enough. You have to work 2 or 3 days in order to support yourself.
Sudan's current civilian government has taken over for 3 years under a power-sharing deal with the military. It has so far drawn slightly more than half of $3 billion in support. But despite that, the new government says it has foreign currency reserves to fund imports for only a few weeks.
The central bank has no option but to print money to buy gold. This cycle has to be broken, and we will do it soon. Basically, what we plan to do, as I told you, that we wanted to retain all these purchasing activities to the Ministry of Finance through real resources. And that's why we need support. You know, we will do our part, but we cannot do it alone. For this government to succeed, for this revolution to proceed into stable democracy in this very, very critical part of Africa and the Middle East, we need understanding and the support, and I'm quite certain we will get it.
as Sudan's new government moves forward to build a youth-focused economy. All that now remains for these citizens is hope for an improved economy. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
South African Airways has announced a restructuring plan that will cut its workforce by almost a fifth. The airline says it has started talks with labor unions about the process. At least 944 employees of the cash-strapped state carrier will be let go. South African Airlines plans to reorganize all its divisions and departments. However, it excludes its low-cost arm Mango, Airchefs, and the SAA technical unit. Over the years, SAA has incurred over $2 billion in cumulative losses. As part of the turnaround plan, the state will pay off SAA's government-guaranteed debt of over $600 million over the next 3 years. Last week, media reports suggested that UK billionaire and founder of Virgin Airlines, Richard Branson, was interested in buying a stake in the national airline. Africa's biggest pay TV group, MultiChoice's half-year profits have leapt to 22%. This comes as the firm cuts losses outside of its home market, South Africa. Foreign exchange swings during the period worked in the firm's favor. The company said last week its profits for the period could increase by up to 25%. Its headline earnings per share, which is the main profit measure in South Africa, stood at 3.41 cents for the 6 months to September. This compared to 78 cents in 2018. MultiChoice says it benefited from tight cost controls and the lower depreciation of the rand against the US dollar. The Democratic Republic of Congo's President Felix Tshisekedi says his government wants to boost the country's budget for next year by almost 60% to $10 billion. According to the Congolese president, the increase is meant to fight poverty. The announcement comes after the International Monetary Fund criticized the DRC's budgeting process. It said the country needed to increase its revenue collection. The DRC relies almost entirely on mining. However, its mineral wealth has done little to alleviate poverty. Most recently, the country has been hit by a weak cobalt price, which has dropped more than 60% since March last year. The DRC is discussing the possibility of a loan program with the IMF. The global lender halted its last loan program with the country in 2012 over concerns about corruption in the mining sector. Tanzania is one of Africa's fastest growing economies, but its infrastructure is struggling to keep up. The UN projects that Dar es Salaam alone will double in size by 2035. In view of this, it needs more roads. The Ubungo interchange, one of the city's biggest infrastructure projects, is an example of how authorities plan to accommodate a growing population. CGTN's Isaac Lukando has more.
The city of Dar es Salaam is growing, and so is its infrastructure. One of its biggest projects is the Ubungo interchange, which employs over 800 Tanzanians and is costing $87 million. It's meant to help solve the city's road congestion challenges.
Dar es Salaam is a congested city, so it needs a lot of infrastructure to help the people. Being the main commercial city of Tanzania, we needed to do much to make sure there is ease of movement from one area to the other, generally to boost businesses.
A 2019 World Bank report revealed that the city loses $1.8 million a day, with congestion causing missed meetings and less time working. Engineers on the site believe this 266-meter interchange will help increase the city's productivity.
An average of 130,000 vehicles pass through the Ubungo junction every day. And in order to reduce congestion, that is why this project was conceived. This is in order to ease vehicles into town, to the port, the airport, and other places like the University of Dar es Salaam and the Mwenge Junction.
The Ubungo interchange is just one example of infrastructure growth that is serving Tanzania's growing population, meeting their needs for mobility and providing means to grow the economy.
Potential road users are eager to see the completion of the mega project.
It's good because it's an important thing and something to be proud of as Tanzanians. We salute our president for this decision.
Having ease of transport already helps me financially because I get to my business early. I earn an income and things move.
The Tanzanian government says it is working hard to spread road projects across the country. It sees connecting small towns, districts and villages through roads as crucial to the growth of the economy.
So we want to deliver road networks down to the people so that it can be very easy to transport their crops to and from their farms, to the markets, to the industries. So that's the Tanzania of the future.
As work on this construction site continues, each nut and bolt may be an indication that Tanzania is slowly building a mobile and potentially prosperous future for its people. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
The China-based New Development Bank, the BRICS Bank, has approved more than $8 billion in loans for projects in its 5 partner countries. Brazil's allotment topped $620 million, much of it devoted to renewable energy projects. Our correspondent in Brazil, Paulo Cabral, visited a wind energy park in the country's northeast that benefited from the resources.
In this part of Brazil's impoverished northeast, known as the Sertão, the backwoods, the land is dry and rain scarce for most of the year. Not many crops thrive in these conditions. But manioc, also known as cassava, will grow here, and most small farmers cultivate it to make starch and flour, a staple food ingredient for many people in this region. There is also lots of strong and constant wind, and such wind has become a source of energy for the country and income for hundreds of families here who are paid rental for the use of their land for wind turbines. Some landowners here with larger areas have up to a dozen turbines set up in their properties, and that does give them some good rental money. But the biggest impact we see here is in the lives of smaller farmers, usually poorer ones, who have space for 1 or 2 turbines. For them, the extra money can make a big difference. José Valdecir da Silva has 2 of these turbines set up on his land. The company that owns them pays the equivalent of about $400 per month for each one.
Teve gente que arrendou e outros não arrendaram.
Some of the people decided to lease their lands and others didn't. Those who didn't now regret it because they're not getting the money. For us who did it, it's good. It's not a whole lot of money, but it's very helpful now because manioc prices are very low.
The Ventos do Araripe Wind Energy Park was built by Brazilian company Casa dos Ventos and completed in 2017. It was partially funded with resources from the China-based New Development Bank, the NDB, also called the BRICS Bank. That NDB funding here in Ventos do Araripe came to about $67 million out of a total of $621 million allocated by the bank for projects across Brazil between 2016 and 2018.
Important to have the support of NDB, not only as a financial standpoint to enhance our capability for the project, but also they bring a lot of experience on structuring these kinds of projects.
The mayor of the 14,000 inhabitants town of Simões, where most of the park's turbines are located, says the 300 towers set up in their territory make a big difference for the city.
The wind park has certainly helped the farmers around here because they receive an income from the use of their land. And this income also helps to boost the local economy and benefits all citizens.
There are many opportunities for investment in infrastructure in Brazil, including those with great potential to improve people's lives. Brazilians will no doubt continue to look to international institutions like the New Development Bank to help make these projects a reality. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, Simões, in Brazil.
We'll leave it there for now, but ahead on global business, President Felix Tshisekedi wants to boost the 2020 budget to $10 billion. That is by almost 60%. We ask how he intends to raise that cash. We will be live in Kinshasa with more details on that. And that's at the top of the hour. For now, though, it's back to you, Beatrice.
Panina, thank you. And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. We look at Kenya's king of vinyl with a rare collection built over 30 years. Now, in Nairobi's Kenyatta Market, famous for its roast meat, there is a music store of note. It is run by James Rugami, who is also known as Kenya's king of vinyl. His shop specializes in vinyl records, and his collection, built over 30 years, ranges from American blues to African classics. CGTN's Wilkisa Nyabwa has more.
The decor of the store welcomes passers-by, promising them a good time. This is, after all, the domain of Kenya's king of vinyl. His name is James Rugami, or Jimmy if you like. And for the last 30 years, he has sold vinyl records and vinyl record players in Nairobi's Kenyatta Market. He stumbled along this path while searching for meaningful employment.
I used to be a teacher, and after some time, like 6 months, it bored me. I decided to look for something else.
Jimmy found what he was searching for in the retro sounds captured on vinyl records.
It was the resurgence of other formats of playing music like CDs. So most music shops were closing down and they had lots of records. So I could go over there and choose what I think is interesting.
Today, sellers reach out to the vinyl collector through social media, and every once in a while, he travels to other countries in search of that rare record. Good vinyl records in African languages are becoming harder to find. A rare record in mint condition can cost upwards of $100 US. But avid buyers don't balk at the price. In the last decade, there has been a resurgence of interest in the records. It reminds Jimmy why he fell in love with them.
There's no comparison with any other format. In actual fact, personally, I don't like a clean record, the very clean one. I like the one that is a little bit prayed and it has that crackle. I'll show you what.
Jimmy's clients come in all ages, the young eager to discover music from years gone by. This store is not just about selling old records or taking a walk down memory lane. In this shop, James Rugami is keeping an old art alive. And in his own way, Kenya's king of vinyl is keeping the wheels spinning day after day.
I get that kick, a really nice one, when I find somebody, let's say like you, coming over and saying, I only see it on movies, and then now I'm showing you, this is it. Doing something that doesn't make you happy and doesn't make others happy, I would rather you move on.
And this is why every day, rain or shine, you'll find the king of vinyl at his store, giving his records a little spin. And if there's a little crackle in the sound, well, to Jimmy's ears, it only makes for better listening. Wilkisa Nyabwa, CGTN.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. Intriguing derbies in store following the CAF Confederations Cup group stage draw in Cairo.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours?